Listen, I hear you all talking a lot about tax cuts to create jobs and the importance of that. But there's a second issue out there that's looming, that is called the deficits. Now, the truth of the matter is that just over the horizon are these massive deficits. We've not only $1.4 trillion now, but every year in the next 10 years, the Obama administration says we're going to have $1 trillion more of deficits. If we're going to cut taxes and not cut spending very much, how are we going to solve this problem? And the first answer goes to Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, the answer here is, and I've been saying it this entire candidacy, nobody to my right has been willing to talk about spending cuts. And everybody who says that...
What would you cut?
What would I cut?
Yeah.
I don't think we have enough time, but I am going to cut... I'm going to cut, Obamacare when it passes. I am going to cut the Department of Education. I'm going to cut every single hack job that is out there that exists today. I will audit the Federal Reserve, and I will see to it that if there is corruption in the Federal Reserve, that we cut that as well. I will cut the wars. I will stop spending money on the wars. We have people over in Japan. We have people over in Germany that defend wealthy nations today. And you know who pays for it? We pay for it. Everyone is incorrect when they say that cutting taxes creates jobs. That is not the truth. Cutting spending historically is what creates jobs. When you cut taxes and you don't cut spending, we get what we had in the Bush administration, which is what bankrupted our country.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, thank you. We need to do a JFK-style, across-the-board tax cut for businesses and families that will create jobs. We've tried everything already. We've done a stimulus 1. Martha's considering a stimulus 2. She was in favor of the first one. We're looking at $12 trillion and counting on the national debt. Wouldn't it be nice to maybe try something a little bit different? Because the stimulus bills aren't working, hasn't created one new job. The Senate President will tell you that Governor Patrick has that money. We're 49th out of 50 and actually releasing the money we have. So how can we even talk about another stimulus bill when the first one hasn't worked? So let's think a little bit differently. Let's go back to basics. We have to hold the line on spending first of all, give the President of the line item veto, do a top-to-bottom review of every federal program and squeeze out any waste like we've done with the Senate President's leadership on those issues. So it's very important to do that, and that's the difference between Martha and me. Her tax proposals will not help at all. They will add to the deficit. The health care bill will add $1 trillion+. The cap-and-trade scheme will increase taxes. The expiring tax cuts will increase taxes. That's the major differences between Martha and me.
Ms. Coakley.
David, I think the question was about the deficit. And let's remember the little bit of history here, that when the Democrats last the presidency before George W. Bush, we were in a pay-as-you-go for spending. You either had to have it in the budget or make sure there was a revenue source for it. That completely went out the window with the Bush-Cheney administration. And so we have deficit spending with reckless spending, unregulated Wall Street, that got us into the problem. And to me, it's astounding that Scott Brown will stand here and say that this problem must have just come out of nowhere, and his solution is to do nothing except to make sure that we do some kind of across-the-board tax cut. It's not going to work, and what I've said, and what he knows I've said in the past, is that we need to get tax revenues up. We need to get the engine of this economy running again, get people back to work, get tax revenues up.
How would you get tax revenues up? You're going to increase taxes?
No, by getting people back to work and by getting people who then are paying taxes.
President Obama's made the vow, no tax increases on any couple earning less than $250,000. Do you join him in that pledge as Senator?
I do.
You do? And you still think you can balance the budget?
Not right away, because we didn't create it overnight. This deficit was created by a reckless administration. We got a lot of work to do, including health care costs, energy costs. Those are all complicated problems that have to be addressed.
Mr. Brown, you're going to jump in.
You have to start dealing in reality, Martha. The tax cuts that we're talking about will create an immediate jolt to the economy and create jobs. And as JFK called for, across-the-board tax cuts will create jobs. That's not a gimmick. That's reality. And to think that it's all about Bush-Cheney, there's plenty of blame to go around. And I'm not going to be living and working on the mistakes of the past. I'm looking to address the mistakes of today. Okay. And there are real clear differences between the two of us on those very simple issues. And if you think a tax cut is not going to work, then I think you're sadly mistaken.
But Mr. Brown, let me ask you both this question now. We've gone through tax cuts in the Bush years. And we did not have this booming growth that you've assumed. And the Congress has also been afraid, people have been afraid in Washington to take on the entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, I want to know if you all are going to have the courage when you go there to take on the entitlement programs, or are we once again going to duck and see these costs go through the roof?
I'm the only one here who has talked about spending, and I've done it the entire campaign. You know why? Because spending is something that's difficult to cut. It's difficult to look at all of the people in the audience and say, you know what, we have to cut entitlement programs. And there's a lot of fat that we can trim at the same time. It's just the truth. We have to do it. We can't do it. The reason why nobody wants to talk about cutting spending is because it costs them votes. But you know what? Every single time you go out there and say, oh, I'm going to cut your taxes, I'm going to raise your entitlement programs, you're just lying to get votes. We have to cut spending. I would like to know what
Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, are you ready to cut them?
Where would I cut? Okay, first of all,
are you ready to take on the entitlement programs?
Yes, I am ready to take on the entitlement programs.
Okay,
I've said
fine,
it before. I'll do it
go,
again.
please.
Thank you. Senator Gregg has filed a bill that will actually be very similar to the base closure bill. Up and down vote. You look at the entitlements. You have a bipartisan commission that will actually look at everything and make a recommendation to us. And I look forward to that opportunity to give my input or not.
And you would, if that commission came in with tax increases, you would support it?
No, I would not. I think we can do better. I think I would not support it, but I would certainly look at entitlements and make that recommendation. At least we have the choice, and that's what's important.
Okay.
You know, David, we just spent a lot of taxpayer dollars on bailing out big corporations, millions and billions of dollars on TARP and stimulus money, taxpayer dollars that didn't have to be spent if we had done better regulation. So I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, yes, we're going to take away Social Security from our greatest generation, for folks with whom we have a contract, who depend upon that, on their prescriptions. There have to be ways that we reach our obligation on that. I think we have to start with where the blame does fall and how we turn this around.
Bottom line, Ms. Coakley, what's your position on whether the Congress ought to consider and be open to reforming Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in a way that brings down the cost curves in all three programs? Are you opposed to that, or are you open to that?
I believe that everything can be looked at, but I will say this. As I stand here today, I think that if we look at new generations coming in who don't have this entitlement, this is not the first place I am going to look, David, in the economy.
Right, but is it a place you're willing to look because that's where the money is?
I understand that, but there's a good reason for that. And this is about more than just the budget and how we got into the deficit problem. It's about the obligations we have to our senior citizens and people in this country who depend upon that for health care.
Last comment.
Thank you, David. It's not about blame. It's about solving the problems of today. And you have to do a top-to-bottom review of every federal program to make sure that we can, as the President called for, I actually agreed with him on that we do that to find any waste. We've done it here. And we can do it in Washington. We need to start to forget about blaming people. There's plenty to go around. We all know it. Let's try to solve the problems of today. And, of course, you need to look at entitlements, and you need to look at every other program and project in Washington.
All right. Let's move on. Unfortunately, I'd love to stay and work through a lot of these more deeply, but the clock is working in another direction. So I'd like to go to a new question. And, Mr. Brown, this one goes to you first, and we'll work our way through. After the incident with the bomber trying to take down the plane over Detroit, the president declared last week that we're in a war against Al Qaeda. Strong words. How do we win this war?
Like the Christmas bomber, should be given constitutional rights, attorneys lawyered up so they can take the fifth and treat them like ordinary criminals. I think they should be treated as enemy combatants. They should be interrogated pursuant to the laws of our land and made sure that we find out exactly if there's any other attacks coming. That's a major difference between Martha and me. Take Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. $500 million it's going to cost. We're giving him constitutional rights. He's taking the fifth. And instead of us getting information from him, he's getting information from us. And Martha agrees with that. I don't. He should be an enemy combatant and treated as such and go through a military tribunal. And we can do better. It's a war that we have to fight. And with my military experience and the training that I have in issues of war and peace, I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
Ms. Coakley.